Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted the straps on her tactical vest, the familiar weight of her medical kit pressing against her chest. The desert sun hung high, painting the barren landscape in shades of gold and harsh orange. The air shimmered with heat, and a dry wind carried the faint scent of gunpowder from a distant skirmish. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, steadying her racing heart. Today's mission was unlike any other. A high-risk hostage extraction behind enemy lines in a hostile territory known for unpredictability and ambush. The SEAL team relied on her skills, and she knew that every life might rest in her hands. Her gaze swept across the team gathered around the tactical map. Sergeant Hawk Hawkins, the team leader, traced their planned infiltration route with a gloved finger. His face was set, jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Lieutenant Alex Falcon Carter adjusted his rifle sling, cracking a small, nervous smile at a teammate's joke. Even in tense moments, the humor was necessary. It was armor against fear. Sarah allowed herself a small, private smile. The camaraderie in this team was their strength, a bond forged through months of training and countless past missions. She crouched beside her medic bag, checking syringes, tourniquets, and painkillers. Every piece of equipment was accounted for, every measure prepared. Her hands moved with practiced precision, almost as if muscle memory could shield her from the chaos she knew awaited. A bead of sweat slid down her temple, but she ignored it. Concentration was her ally. She glanced at the horizon, the barren ridges where enemy forces could emerge at any moment. This was the calm before the storm, the fragile moment before life and death collided. Nearby, Hawk called out final instructions. "Remember, we go in quietly, stick to the plan, eyes open, heads down, and trust each other." His voice was firm, yet carried a weight of reassurance. Sarah nodded. She could trust them just as they trusted her. Each of these men was a master of their craft, trained for danger and equipped to survive it. But even the best plans had flaws, and even the strongest warriors could fall. That knowledge tightened her chest like a vice, but it also sharpened her focus. Her mind briefly drifted, imagining the families waiting back home, the mothers, fathers, siblings, and partners who prayed daily for their safe return. The thought was a reminder, a motivation. Each life in her care carried more than muscle and bone, it carried hope. She whispered a silent vow to herself. No one would be left behind. Not today. The team moved out, boots crunching against gravel and stone. Their formation was tight, silent, disciplined, a shadow across the arid landscape. Sarah's pulse synchronized with each step, each heartbeat a rhythm of readiness. Around her, the desert seemed to hold its breath, the wind ceasing for a moment as if sensing the tension. Every glance over her shoulder reminded her that danger could erupt at any moment, that every shadow could hide a foe. As they approached the first ridge overlooking the valley below, Sarah tightened her grip on her medical kit. The distant hum of engines hinted at enemy movement. She swallowed hard and forced herself to relax her shoulders. Focus, she reminded herself. Preparation, not fear, would guide her through the next hours. Her mind replayed scenarios, treatments, and contingency plans, each rehearsed until instinct could take over. For now, there was only anticipation, only the quiet tension of professionals on the brink of action. The calm before the storm was deceptive, yet essential. It allowed them to gather strength, to breathe, and to steel themselves. Sarah glanced at her team one last time, faces set in determination, eyes scanning the horizon, hearts beating in silent unison. She allowed herself one final thought before stepping into uncertainty. Whatever happened, she would fight, she would endure, and she would not let them down. The desert seemed endless, yet their purpose was clear. And in that moment, Sarah Mitchell became more than a medic. She became a lifeline, a beacon of hope, and a force ready to face the chaos that awaited them. The team descended the ridge with measured, silent steps. Dust swirled around their boots as they entered the narrow canyon below, the sun blinding through the haze. Every creak of a boot against stone, every rustle of dry brush, seemed in the tense air. Sarah's senses sharpened. She could feel the heat radiating from the sun on her back and the nervous energy pulsing through her teammates. Her hands rested lightly on the straps of her medical kit, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. She had trained for this scenario countless times, but simulation could never match reality. 2 clicks to the east, whispered Falcon, pointing toward a ridge line. Sarah squinted, tracing the contours of the terrain. Enemy scouts could be lurking anywhere, blending seamlessly with rocks and shadows. The team adjusted formations, slipping silently from one cover to another. Hawk's voice was low, almost a hiss in the quiet. Eyes sharp. Remember, one misstep and it's over. Sarah's heartbeat accelerated, her palms damp inside her gloves, yet she remained calm, a steadying presence among adrenaline-fueled teammates. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a rifle split the air. Bullets whizzed past the group, kicking up dust and small stones. Instinctively, Sarah dove behind a large boulder, dragging Petty Officer with her. The SEAL team returned fire, coordinated, precise, and deadly. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she tore open her kit, checking tourniquets and emergency bandages. "Stay with me," she whispered. His breath was ragged, fear evident in his wide eyes. She applied a quick dressing to a bleeding wound, murmuring encouragement. The desert's heat and gunfire melded into a surreal haze. Time seemed suspended, each second stretching into eternity. The team was pinned, enemy fire coming from hidden ridges on both sides. Hawk signaled for a flanking maneuver, and Sarah clambered over rocks, adrenaline pumping, to reach another team member who had been struck. She assessed the wound, deep, bleeding heavily but not fatal. With practiced precision, she stabilized the injury, using whatever supplies she had on hand. Every movement was calculated, deliberate. The SEALs trusted her implicitly. Without her, the mission would collapse. Bullets ricocheted off nearby rocks and explosions shook the canyon walls. Sarah's ears rang and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled her lungs. Yet she pushed forward, moving from one injured teammate to the next, patching, bandaging, stabilizing. She barked instructions, reassured the terrified, and kept herself and others focused. Amid the chaos, she became a calm center, a lifeline against a storm of violence. The mission's objective lay ahead, a compound rumored to hold hostages. Time was critical, any delay could cost lives. Hawk gestured to the team and they advanced cautiously, blending into the shadows. Sarah's eyes scanned constantly, every ridge, rock, and shadow a potential threat. She moved like a ghost, silent, determined, her mind balancing between survival tactics and emergency care. As they approached the outer perimeter of the compound, movement in the distance caught her eye, a patrol, armed and alert, advancing unknowingly toward them. Hawk signaled to stop. Sarah's heart thumped in her chest, but she forced her breathing into measured rhythm. They were close. Danger was imminent. Every instinct screamed that the firestorm waiting ahead would test them beyond limits. But Sarah had one thought overriding all fear: she would keep them alive no matter what. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening, and the team crouched behind cover. Ahead, the compound loomed, enemy soldiers patrolling methodically. Sarah gritted her teeth and adjusted her kit. She had no illusions about the challenge to come, but within her burned the unshakable certainty that she would face it head-on. They were about to enter the fire, and she would be the anchor that held them all together. The team crept closer to the compound, shadows clinging to their bodies like protective armor. Every sound, the scrape of a boot, the whisper of the wind, felt. Sarah's eyes darted over the terrain, scanning for threats. Her hands hovered near her kit, ready to leap into action. The compound loomed ahead, its walls jagged and oppressive, hiding enemy soldiers who moved with lethal precision. Hawk signaled a halt, and the team huddled behind a low wall. Communication was limited. Only hand signals conveyed the next steps. Without warning, gunfire erupted from a hidden ridge. The world exploded into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off rocks and walls, and the ground trembled with explosions. The SEALs dropped to the sand, returning fire with deadly efficiency, but the ambush had struck with brutal precision. Sarah's ears rang, and adrenaline surged through her veins. 5 of the SEALs were hit almost simultaneously. Their screams cut through the roar of gunfire, piercing her focus yet sharpening her resolve. She dove toward the nearest casualty, heart hammering, mind racing. Corporal lay on his back, blood seeping from a deep wound in his side. Sarah ripped open her kit and applied a tourniquet, whispering reassurances even as bullets kicked up dust around her. She moved methodically, treating one wounded teammate after another, her hands steady despite the chaos. Every second was a battle, every decision a matter of life or death. She barked instructions, coordinated movements, and reassured the injured. "Hold on, you're going to be fine," she shouted, her voice cutting through panic like a blade. Amid the chaos, radio contact failed. Command assumed the worst. The medic and several SEALs were down. Sarah's heart sank briefly, but she refused to let the misinformation break her. They had to survive. They had no backup. She stabilized the wounded and prepared for extraction, scanning the terrain for safe routes while maintaining a defensive posture. She moved like a shadow, carrying supplies and guiding the injured to temporary cover, refusing to pause even as exhaustion began to gnaw at her. Explosions rattled the canyon, dust choking the air. The enemy pressed their advantage, forcing the team to adapt constantly. Sarah lifted a heavier SEAL onto her back, muscles screaming, sweat stinging her eyes. She pushed through pain, adrenaline masking her fatigue. Each step was agony, but surrender was not an option. Her training merged with instinct, creating a precision-driven efficiency born of countless drills and a single-minded will to save her team. The SEALs, despite their injuries, responded to her direction. Her calm authority cut through terror. With precise coordination, they moved from one rocky outcrop to another, using the terrain as cover while Sarah applied emergency care with relentless determination. The enemy's fire was unrelenting, yet she refused to falter. Each soldier she saved became a beacon of hope, a reminder that her mission extended beyond herself. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert in blood-red hues, Sarah realized the magnitude of what they faced. They were isolated, wounded, and surrounded, yet alive. Her hands were slick with sweat and blood, body trembling with exhaustion. But one thought burned brighter than fear: they would survive. I will get them home. In that moment, amidst the smoke, dust, and deafening gunfire, Sarah Mitchell became more than a medic. She became the anchor holding a fractured team together, a lifeline in a storm of chaos. The night was approaching, and with it, uncertainty and danger. But she had no choice. She had to keep moving, keep fighting, and keep them alive. Failure was not an option. The ambush had left the team fractured. Shadows stretched across the canyon as dusk settled in, and Sarah found herself leading a fractured unit of wounded SEALs through narrow, jagged terrain. Her mind raced, calculating every step, every risk. The roar of distant gunfire still echoed in her ears, a grim reminder that enemy forces were still searching, still hunting. Communication with base was dead. She was officially listed as KIA. The realization would have crushed anyone else, but Sarah could not afford despair. Her focus sharpened. Survival now depended on vigilance, ingenuity, and unyielding determination. She glanced at her charges. Petty Officer groaned softly, gripping his side, eyes tight with pain. Specialist had a deep leg wound, making each step excruciating. Corporal's arm was slashed, blood soaked through his uniform. Even Falcon, though alert, was pale and trembling. Each life depended on her, and she felt the full weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She adjusted her kit, distributing water sparingly, improvising splints from broken rifle stocks and webbing. Supplies were limited. Every bandage, every pill was precious. The desert night descended quickly, the temperature plummeting and forcing the team to press forward despite fatigue. Sarah led the way, crouched and alert, scanning every shadow, every rock outcropping. Her training became instinct. Each step was measured, silent, deliberate. She relied on natural cover, using the terrain to shield her team from view. Every noise, a branch snapping, a distant animal, was treated as a potential threat. Sleep, warmth, even food were luxuries they could not afford. Survival depended on movement and constant vigilance. The wounded groaned, each step a reminder of their fragility. Sarah whispered encouragement, steadying hands and trembling bodies alike. "You're doing great. Keep moving. Almost there," she said, her voice firm but calm. She had no illusions about the journey ahead. Every mile through the canyon was fraught with danger, and the enemy's presence was relentless. Improvised defensive maneuvers became their lifeline. She positioned her charges behind boulders, scanning for ambush points, always anticipating threats before they appeared. Pain gnawed at her own body, bruised shoulders, scraped knees, and a growing fatigue, but she ignored it. Her mind was a machine of focus, prioritizing others' survival above her own. Flashbacks of past missions, of lessons learned in training, sharpened her instincts. She recalled techniques to move the wounded efficiently, to treat injuries under fire, to ration supplies in life-or-death conditions. Every memory became a tool, every lesson a weapon against exhaustion and fear. Hours passed. The desert, once blazing and unforgiving, now lay in a moonlit silence, eerily quiet except for distant enemy patrols. Sarah guided the team through a narrow pass, signaling for silence, caution, and careful steps. She moved like a ghost, yet her presence was constant and reassuring. She whispered plans, assessed injuries repeatedly, and pushed the wounded to keep moving. Survival was no longer about fighting. It was about endurance, strategy, and unwavering focus. When dawn began to break, painting the canyon walls in muted gold, Sarah paused briefly to assess the team. They had survived the night, but only just. Her hands were raw, her body trembling, yet her eyes remained sharp. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, though only a brief one. The journey was far from over. Ahead lay more obstacles, more danger, and the constant threat of enemy forces. But she would not stop. She would carry them through, step by grueling step, and no force on earth could break her resolve. In the isolation of the desert, with only the wounded and the endless terrain around her, Sarah became both guardian and guide, the pulse of the team's survival, and the unyielding force keeping them alive against impossible odds. The first light of dawn revealed the full scope of the desert's brutality. Sarah's legs ached with every step, muscles burning, yet she refused to falter. 5 seals lay in her care, each one injured, vulnerable, and dependent on her unwavering focus. The team's formation was improvised now, each step a careful balance between speed and caution. The enemy could appear at any moment, and extraction was still hours away. There was no backup. There was no margin for error. Every movement mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. She hoisted Corporal onto her shoulders first, the man gritting his teeth through pain. The weight was enormous, but her resolve was heavier. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she pressed on, moving through rocky slopes and jagged terrain. She whispered too, keeping him conscious and calm. "You're doing great. Keep talking to me. Focus on my voice." Her voice cut through fear like a lifeline, grounding him even as danger surrounded them. Specialist was next, and she improvised a carry with her makeshift sling, keeping his leg elevated and bandaged. Groaning but alert, followed behind, supported by Falcon, who, despite his own injuries, stayed focused on security. Sarah's mind calculated every step, every potential threat. Enemy patrols were relentless, and every shadow seemed alive. Yet she refused to stop. Each step was agony, each breath a battle against exhaustion, but she pushed onward, driven by duty, loyalty, and sheer determination. The terrain worsened. Cliffs, unstable boulders, and thorny brush slowed their progress. Sarah gritted her teeth, using every ounce of strength to navigate the landscape while carrying her wounded comrades. Sweat burned her eyes, blood from scraped hands streaked her face, but she did not falter. She rationed water carefully, offering drops sparingly to the wounded, all while remaining vigilant. Improvisation became essential. Broken gear, tattered clothing, and the natural environment were tools in her arsenal. Time blurred. Minutes stretched into hours, exhaustion threatening to overtake her, but she refused to yield. Her mind replayed every lesson from years of training, controlled breathing, efficient movement, prioritizing injuries, and improvising under pressure. Each SEAL's survival was a metric, each heartbeat a reminder of why she could not fail. Fear existed, but it was a background hum, drowned out by her relentless focus. As the sun climbed higher, the desert revealed new dangers, enemy patrols moving methodically, rocks that threatened to topple, and heat that sapped strength. Sarah adjusted her route, leading the team through shadowed paths and natural cover. She guided them silently, using hand signals, whispers, and brief glances to communicate. Every action was deliberate, calculated, and precise. Survival depended not just on strength, but on patience, intelligence, and unwavering focus. Despite the agony, she never wavered. She stabilized wounds, reassured the injured, and carried them through impossible obstacles. Her body screamed, her vision blurred at times, but her mind remained sharp, a razor of resolve. With every step, she reminded herself, 1 mile closer, 1 heartbeat longer, 1 life saved. That was all that mattered. By late afternoon, the canyon's exit was in sight. The team had endured, battered but alive, and her unyielding courage had held them together. Sarah allowed herself a moment to glance back at the jagged landscape they had traversed, an obstacle course of death and chaos. The journey was far from over, but she had proven something vital. With determination, skill, and unwavering focus, the impossible could be achieved. Through grit, courage, and relentless willpower, Sarah Mitchell had become more than a medic. She had become a force capable of defying death itself, carrying her team against all odds toward the promise of survival. Night had fallen again, and the desert became an endless expanse of shadows and moonlight. Sarah's body ached with every step. Her shoulders burned from carrying 2 of the heaviest wounded seals, her legs trembled with exhaustion, and every joint protested against the grueling march. But there was no choice. The nearest safe point was miles away, and any hesitation could mean death. The moonlight cast eerie shapes across the canyon walls, turning rocks into potential threats. Sarah's eyes darted constantly, scanning for movement, listening for the faintest whisper of enemy patrols. Every sound was a possible ambush. Specialist's leg wound had worsened during the climb, forcing Sarah to improvise a makeshift harness from her webbing. Though stable, groaned each time she shifted him onto her back, and his arm required constant support. Each movement demanded precision and ingenuity. A single mistake could jeopardize all of them. Despite the weight and the pain, she pushed forward, her mind focused entirely on survival. She reminded herself that fear had no place here. Only action, only perseverance, only determination. The desert was merciless. Loose rocks shifted beneath her feet, thorny brush tore at uniforms and flesh alike, and the chill of the night contrasted sharply with the lingering heat of the day. Yet Sarah adapted, using natural cover to shield the team, weaving a path that minimized exposure to enemy patrols. Her movements were a delicate blend of stealth, efficiency, and brute strength. Every step was calculated, yet every moment carried the risk of collapse, of injury, or of detection. Time became fluid. Hours passed like minutes, and exhaustion threatened to consume her. Her breaths were shallow, muscles screamed with fatigue, yet she found reserves of strength she never knew existed. Memories of past training, of mentors and previous missions, guided her actions. Improvised techniques, using broken rifles as support, stacking rocks for leverage, redistributing weight between the wounded, allowed her to move despite overwhelming odds. She whispered to each SEAL, offering reassurance, grounding them in the reality of survival. Almost there, keep your eyes on me, just a little further. Enemy patrols were relentless, moving like shadows across the desert. Sarah timed every movement, every pause, every breath, ensuring they remained undetected. Her heart raced constantly, yet she forced her mind into controlled focus. Fear existed at the edges of her consciousness, but determination eclipsed it entirely. Survival required constant vigilance and tactical thinking, even under extreme fatigue. Every movement was a negotiation with death, every step a defiance of impossibility. At one point, she paused atop a rocky ridge, surveying the path ahead. The moonlight revealed a narrow passage flanked by cliffs, a treacherous but necessary route. She calculated angles, weight distribution, and potential hazards, then slowly guided the team forward. Each SEAL relied on her completely, and she bore the full responsibility of their lives. Her training, her instincts, and her relentless willpower merged into a singular force. She had become more than a medic. She was the guardian of 5 lives, the anchor holding them together amidst chaos. Hours later, as dawn's first light crept across the horizon, Sarah spotted the faint outline of the extraction point. Hope surged, mingled with exhaustion and pain. The journey was far from over, but they were within reach of safety. Each step forward was agony, yet her determination burned brighter than the desert sun. She whispered to the team, "We're almost there, stay with me. You're going to make it." Sarah Mitchell's resolve had carried them through the impossible, the darkness, the ambush, the injuries, and the endless desert. Against every conceivable odds, she had death itself. The journey was nearing its end, but the hardest challenge, returning to the base alive with all 5 wounded, still lay ahead. And she would meet it with courage, with grit, and with unwavering determination. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, casting long shadows on the jagged terrain. Sarah's body screamed in protest with every step, but she refused to yield. The faint outline of the U.S. base appeared in the distance, a small cluster of buildings, antennas, and vehicles, a promise of safety that seemed almost unreal after the endless desert nightmare. Her heart surged with hope, yet caution remained. Enemy patrols could still be lurking, and one misstep could undo everything. She adjusted her grip on the wounded SEALs, each movement calculated, deliberate, and painstakingly slow to avoid aggravating their injuries. Almost there, she whispered repeatedly, a mantra to steady both herself and her team. Every groan, every shallow breath from the wounded drove her forward. She imagined the relief of medical teams waiting beyond the gates, their hands skilled and ready to save lives. She visualized their faces, calm and professional, offering care and compassion after hours of hellish survival. The thought strengthened her resolve. Each step became a victory, each footfall a defiance of exhaustion and pain. As the group approached the base perimeter, Sarah's worn eyes met the sentries. She staggered forward, blood and dust streaked across her face, sweat mixing with grime. The soldiers froze, rifles half raised, shock registering in their expressions. The reports had listed her as KIA hours earlier. Seeing her alive and carrying 5 critically wounded SEALs was almost incomprehensible. Panic and confusion mingled with awe. "She's alive," whispered one guard, barely able to speak. "All of them?" Another asked, incredulous. Sarah's jaw tightened as she focused on the final steps, pushing through exhaustion to reach the medical teams waiting at the gate. Medics rushed forward, cutting harnesses, stabilizing patients, and immediately triaging injuries. Sarah handed over the first SEAL, guiding paramedics to prevent further injury. The wounded groaned and blinked in pain, but alive because she refused to stop. She felt their eyes on her, trust, gratitude, and disbelief mingling in silent understanding. Commanders arrived, their faces pale with shock. "Lieutenant Mitchell, we had you down," one officer said, voice trembling. Sarah only nodded, too exhausted for words, her focus still on ensuring every soldier was accounted for and safe. The team was rushed to the infirmary, where advanced medical care began immediately. Sarah's kit lay open at her feet, bloodied, worn, a testament to the night's horrors. The weight of what she had accomplished began to sink in, yet there was little time to dwell. Debriefings awaited, and the reality of the mission's chaos loomed large. Reports had to be reconciled, miscommunications corrected, and her actions officially recognized. But for now, the wounded were alive, and that was all that mattered. Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe, leaning against a wall for support, her body trembling from exhaustion. The desert's horrors, the ambush, the impossible journey, it all coalesced into a singular memory of survival, endurance, and courage. She had faced impossible odds, carried her team through life-threatening danger, and emerged victorious. The base, once a distant goal, had become a sanctuary, a place where survival turned into triumph. Tears mingled with dust on the faces of the wounded as they recognized the magnitude of what had occurred. Sarah's eyes, though weary, reflected resolve, humility, and an unwavering sense of duty. She had walked through death, chaos, and despair, and emerged not only alive but victorious. Her return was miraculous, a living testament to courage, skill, and unyielding determination. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the base, but even in the brightness, the story of the night remained etched in every line of her exhausted, bloodied face. Sarah Mitchell had impossible odds. She had carried 5 lives through hell and returned, the embodiment of heroism in its most unrelenting form. The base was alive with controlled chaos. Medics moved swiftly, tending to the wounded SEALs, while officers debriefed, whispered, and stared in disbelief. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly on the edge of it all, her body battered, bruised, and soaked with sweat, dust, and blood. The world seemed to move in slow motion around her. Cameras clicked, radios buzzed, and yet for a moment, everything felt surreal. She had walked through hell, carried 5 lives on her shoulders, and emerged alive, despite being officially listed as KIA. Commanders approached, their faces a mixture of relief, admiration, and astonishment. "Lieutenant Mitchell, no one thought you'd make it," one said, voice trembling. Sarah's eyes met theirs, steady and unwavering. "I didn't think about that," she replied simply. "I only thought about them." Her humility cut through the awe surrounding her. For Sarah, medals, recognition, and headlines were meaningless compared to the lives she had saved. Her thoughts lingered on the groans of her team, the terror in their eyes, and the quiet trust that had allowed her to carry them through impossible odds. The wounded SEALs, stabilized and recovering, slowly began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. Petty Officer, once barely conscious, managed a weak smile, tears streaking the grime on his face. You saved us," he whispered. Specialist nodded in agreement while Corporal gripped her hand with unsteady strength. Sarah allowed herself a brief, private smile. The journey had been unimaginable, filled with fear, pain, and relentless danger, but each of them had survived. Each of them had returned home because she refused to give up. The day continued with ceremonies and interviews. Reporters, officers, and fellow soldiers clamored to understand how one woman had every expectation. Sarah answered with calm clarity, emphasizing teamwork, training, and the relentless focus on survival. She downplayed her heroism, insisting that the mission's success belonged to everyone. Yet those who witnessed her actions, the night in the desert, the ambush, the impossible journey, understood the truth. She had been extraordinary. Courage, skill, and determination had converged into one indomitable force. Later, in quiet moments, Sarah reflected on the mission. The desert, the ambush, and the endless trek across treacherous terrain replayed in her mind. Pain lingered, fatigue weighed heavily, and memories of screams and gunfire haunted her thoughts. Yet within the trauma, a deeper truth had emerged. Duty, loyalty, and courage were not abstract concepts. They were actions, choices made under impossible pressure. She had chosen to fight, to endure, to carry others through death and chaos. That choice had defined her legacy. Young medics and soldiers sought her guidance in the days that followed, inspired by the story of survival and heroism. Sarah trained them, shared techniques, and recounted lessons learned, emphasizing resilience, ingenuity, and unwavering focus. Her influence extended beyond the battlefield, shaping new generations of warriors and medics. The story of the medic who walked back into base carrying 5 wounded SEALs became legend, a reminder that courage is measured not by fame, but by action. In the quiet evening, Sarah stood alone atop a small rise overlooking the base. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the desert she had conquered. Memories of fear, chaos, and pain lingered, yet so did a sense of fulfillment. She had faced the impossible and survived not for glory but for duty and loyalty. The desert had tested her, the enemy had tried to break her, and yet she had emerged unbowed. Sarah Mitchell's name would echo through the ranks, not just as a hero, but as a symbol of endurance, courage, and the unwavering spirit of those who put others above themselves. The story of the medic listed as KIA who walked back carrying 5 wounded SEALs would live on, a testament to the human will, the bonds of brotherhood, and the extraordinary acts that ordinary people are capable of when confronted with the ultimate test.